Welcome to the Impact Learning Visionaries podcast, where we celebrate the unsung heroes of the learning and development industry. As always, we'll be bringing some laughter and a bit of fun along the way, but more importantly, you'll get some incredible insights, key lessons, and unique perspectives on everything related and possibly unrelated to training and development. Let's get this show on the road. Hello everybody, and welcome to the Impact Learning Visionaries podcast. Today we have with us Louise Campbell, who heads up the learning and development at Robert Walters. She's who are a world-leading specialist recruitment agency, and Louise has 20 years of experience in her field and has built a lot of forward-thinking, goal-oriented and people-centric cultures within her organization. And Louise also she's a very firm advocate for soft skills training, with communication at the forefront of every individual's success. She's passionate about upskilling and developing teams as early as possible so that they have the lifelong skills that will equip them to tackle the ever-changing challenges the future of work throws at them. Welcome, Louise.
Thank you, Jason. Delighted to be here.
So I guess the first big question is being at almost the start of most people's journeys in their career, and whether it's at the early stage of their career or whether it's at the late stage of their career, I think you have a kind of a unique view on the emerging and changing skills that people need to kind of be relevant in their jobs today. You're kind of getting a sense of it from both sides, from the candidate side who needs to find a job and make sure they have the relevant skills, and from the employer's side who's looking for these new sets of skills. Can you tell us a little bit about some of those insights and some of the emerging trends that you're seeing in the space?
Yeah, it's interesting actually, Jason, because I've been in the world of recruitment now for just over 25 years. And what I would say is that these things come in kind of peaks and troughs. Clients look for certain skills. Now, typically the ones that change are the ones within tech. So it's certain packages, it's fluency in certain languages. On the tech side, it's the next new big thing. So clients will come to us as a recruitment firm and say, I'm looking for X, Y, Z. What remains a constant is the people skills. It's the people who can communicate well. It's the people who are able to work within a team. It's the people who can, look at problems and solve them and work well under pressure, etc. So although I would say there is always a movement, and there is always this kind of big push towards learning new skills and working towards the next big thing and the next big source of demand, whether it be coming from our clients or our candidates, I think that some things remain really constant over time.
Yeah, I think I completely agree with that. I think what I'm observing is more the awareness of the significance of these skills on both sides. I think historically companies would say, we really need those strong technical skills, or we really need those vocational skills, and then somewhere in the kind of employees' journey, they would go, that you're definitely lacking in this area. Often in some performance review where some manager was, looking for something to kind of give as critical feedback. Whereas now I'm starting to kind of see that it's more of a demand at the kind of cold face where previously the dominating skills were things like, you've got to know that programming language, or you've got to know this accounting system. However, now what we're starting to see is in this kind of future world of work, people are starting to kind of acknowledge the significance and importance of a lot of these skills, like, that you mentioned, like critical thinking and problem solving and empathy and customer experience. So all of these kind of skills, I think, are becoming more visible, and there's this growing understanding of their relevance in organizations. Are you seeing that play out?
Absolutely. And I think, post-COVID, Jason, we witnessed a real shift in what clients were looking for, in the sense that the people who they were looking for, the personalities and the characters that they were looking for, specifically in leadership roles, took on a whole new persona when it came to the softer skills. So you're looking at a hybrid world where you've got some people, based in the office, some people based at home, and most of our clients are looking for leaders who have exceptional communication skills, because that's a whole new skill set that a lot of people don't necessarily have, and certainly didn't have pre-COVID, where they were able to manage groups of remote people, groups of people who were in the office, whatever that might be. So we've got that. That's a skill set in itself. Then you are looking for people who have the ability to keep your employee engaged. Post-COVID again, people are working from home. What differentiates one company from another when I'm sitting in my bedroom working away on my laptop? How do I feel aligned to a particular organisation? What is my purpose when I'm working for these people? So, as an organisation, you want to be able to hire leaders and managers and people leaders who are able to define that and define it very clearly, know what a company's EVP is, and really get people engaged, which is a difficult thing to do when half your staff are working remotely. And to find that point of differentiation and to inspire people to want to do their job. So I think that is a huge. Sorry, go ahead.
Carry on.
No, go ahead.
I was just going to say you mentioned an acronym EVP, which is Employee Value Proposition, correct?
Yes, correct.
So can you maybe just elaborate a little bit on what that specifically means and why it's such an important metric in this kind of context?
Yeah, I think a company's EVP, particularly in this day and age, is really important because it defines for employees, why do I want to work there? Why do I want to work for this company? What do they offer? What is their purpose? What are the values that they hold? What is their culture within? And their value proposition of what they can offer me as somebody who wants to work there. It is incredibly important to be able to differentiate that now because, as I said, if you're sitting at home, working at your kitchen table, what is going to make you feel really passionate about the job that you do if you're working for one pharma company or another, or one tech firm or another? It's really important to be able to say the reason why I work for this business and the reason why I'm engaged and feel aligned to the values and the purpose of this company, is because there's something specifically there that's talking to me and that speaks to me and that I can align myself with. And I think if companies don't have that, they're really missing out. And from working in recruitment for the past 20 years, again, it's peaks and troughs, it's supply and demand. There'll be times when the market is very candidate short and clients will be really competing and really selling themselves in order to get the best talent out there on the market. And then there'll be times where the market is awash of candidates and clients sometimes sit back and think, I don't really need to sell myself because I can have my pick and choice of candidates that are out there. And I always think you're really missing a trick unless you have a definitive EVP, which you as an employer are going out to the market and saying, this is us, this is what makes us different, and this is what we stand for. And it now, particularly, I think with the younger generation, that is a key deciding factor in where they want to work.
I couldn't agree more, and I think even in those very, very rare moments, which I think have been far and few between, where there are a surplus of skilled candidates in the market, you still need that that clear value proposition, because everybody is competing for the best and brightest, and
exactly.
And it's an expensive exercise, or maybe an expensive lesson would be a better kind of word to use, of bringing the wrong people into your organization. Not only those lacking the skills that we've talked about, but those kind of lacking the passion for the vision of the company, or misaligning with that vision.
Absolutely. And again, as I said, when we look at feedback from new starters across the globe, and when we say to them, what is really important to you? Why did you come and work with our business? And there's 4,500 of us across the globe. People will say what differentiates us from another business in our field, it is things in our EVP like our ESG, our D&I values, our, these things that 10 years ago, 20 years ago, when I was looking for a job, I didn't ask about any ESG policies. It certainly wasn't something I was interested in, or, any diversity and inclusion. Now this is really important to people, and people want to come to a workplace where, they feel heard, where they feel as if there's a level of logical safety, where they feel accepted, where our environmental policies are important, etc. So all of that really kind of forms the part of the EVP that is really important to the majority of job seekers these days.
Mm. So I guess I'm kind of moving on from there is your role has, essentially kind of changed from, as you said, like before we started chatting, from a kind of a managing director role to more recently a learning and development role.
Correct.
It's an interesting kind of trajectory. I'm curious to know, how did you go from the one to the other, and what were some of the kind of elements that took you on that journey?
It's funny, actually, a lot of people ask me that, and for me it was a really natural progression, and I'll try and explain to you in a concise manner. So 18 years as managing director of the Irish office, grew the Irish business, and was really overseeing all aspects of the business. What I found, and I've thought about this a lot, what I found brought me the most success in my previous role was, number one, hiring the right people. And number two, making sure I gave them the skill set. Once they came in the door, I trained them well enough to be successful in their role. And I think if you speak to any MD and you say to them, what makes your job easy? It's hiring great people. What makes your job difficult? It's when the people don't work out. So for me, it was a very simple thing of, if I get this part of my job right, I'm going to achieve success in that part of the role. And it was a part of the job I really enjoyed. I really enjoyed watching people coming into the business and making sure that we had this, somewhat slick pathway for training them up, so that I could impart my knowledge and my senior management's knowledge to new starters really quickly, to make sure that they got up and running and became successful. And I think the one thing that used to keep me awake at night was, if people ever left our business, and if I felt as if they didn't have every opportunity to succeed while they were with us, because maybe it was a bad quarter, it was a busy quarter, we didn't put enough time and investment into them, I would know that. And I didn't like that when people didn't work out, and I would always think to myself, we could have done that little bit more. So it was always something that I loved doing and something I was really interested in. And then 2 years ago, I got approached by our Chief People Officer and our CEO, who said, look, there's a bigger job where, we would be looking at somebody to take over learning and development. And I thought about it for a while, and my first reaction was, why would I go from kind of managing a business into something quite specific that I really don't know an awful lot about, in the sense that I don't have a background in L&D. And then I thought about it and I said, you know what, I love doing this. This gives me an opportunity to work with all of our employees across the globe. It's a huge opportunity. I love the global feature in our business. I love working with people on an international level. I like dealing with international colleagues. I'm interested in the nuances between the cultures in different offices. And I thought to myself, this is a really good opportunity to take my skill set geographically into a bigger environment. And it was also time to move on from my previous job, because I had a successor who had been very patiently sitting there, who was well able to take over from me.
So it sounds like you didn't take on a new position, more so than you scaled out something that you were really passionate about and seemed to be doing really well.
Well, that was part of it, and that's what I initially naively thought that I could do. I thought, I'll just take what I know and bring it across the globe. And then it's been a really interesting 18 months, because within Robert Walters, even though we've never had a centralised L&D function, we have really good people in pretty much every single office across the globe who have been doing a version of what I was doing. So, what I initially thought would be a 3-month kind of, under the bonnet audit of what was going on across the globe turned out to be something much bigger when I realised there were lots of people doing this. And as a result, my next challenge really was looking at how do I take the best of all of these things and create a kind of an L&D proposition which is globally fit for purpose, which is aligned with all of the different cultural nuances across the globe. Because even though, recruitment is recruitment, there is a different way of recruiting in New York than there would be in Singapore, than there would be in London or Paris. That the process might be the same, but the maybe the relationships along the way would be different. So that's been really, really interesting in developing this, which has been one of the kind of initial things that I've done along with L&D colleagues across the globe, is developing a kind of a uniform message of what good looks like. And that's pretty simple because we're talking about our relationships and our experiences with our candidates, with our clients, and then internally, or the experience with our colleagues. So it's defining what good looks like, taking the best out of everything, and then making it fit for global consumption.
It's like they always say, the devil's in the details, right? So
absolutely.
When you go out there and you look at all the different offices and you realize, well, actually it's not just a cookie cutter approach. And as an engineer, I've always liked to say that nothing ruins a perfectly good process like involving people in it. So we always tend to overcomplicate things with So I mean, in that sense, I'm really fascinated. I've always been fascinated about the kind of cultural differences because, as someone who is really kind of, involved in understanding human psychology, because, gamification is a big element of what we do. I always look at the different challenges of dealing with people in different cultural environments and how they're motivated in different ways and how they need to function in different ways. I mean, can you give us some examples of the big cultural kind of, you talked about New York versus Singapore, and I kind of already starting to see a picture emerge that kind of probably very brash, like go New York style with maybe a more respectable and reserved Singapore style emerging. But what were some of the big challenges that you faced from a cultural perspective?
From a cultural perspective, it's been interesting. The first thing that I would say that actually hasn't been a challenge is the absolute openness of the business, which I've been really lucky to witness, particularly post-COVID, the openness of the business to open their doors and to share best practice. And there is a real natural curiosity within my business to hear about what's going on in Sydney, Singapore, Thailand, wherever it might be. We have offices kind of dotted all over the world, and we've got hubs of real productivity, and people are really curious to find out what's going on there. How is that office doing so well? Why are they so profitable? So the first thing that I did notice was that when we started bringing together, the kind of the learning and development collateral, it was that people were really curious to know, what are they doing over there? Which is a great starting point. From talking to, I suppose, the leaders on the ground, we would get an idea of what will and what won't work. As you said, for example, there are ways that we would maybe train our consultants in London or in New York, which just wouldn't be appropriate in other regions. And we would have a very much kind of model where we would have a shell of a model, but then we will always test it on the ground and say, is that going to work here? How's that going to go down? We'd speak to local leaders and they'd say, no, we don't do that. That's not how we would approach a client negotiation, or that's not how we approach a fee negotiation, whatever that might be. And then we change it. So I don't think there's been any massive challenges in that sense. It's just about, as you said, the devil is in the detail, knowing that not everything is appropriate for every market, and making sure that it is fit for purpose as a result.
I mean, and as someone who's had to kind of navigate this complexity, how do you know when something is culturally necessary versus when something is a behavior that's set in that just isn't helping, and culture is maybe being used as a term to kind of justify it, but actually when you cut through it and look at the kind of root cause, it's just kind of maybe behaviors that need to change and not necessarily have anything to do with cultures.
Yeah, it's that is interesting. I think, look, at the end of the day, our business is a relatively simple one. It's not a technical business. It's about people. We also have, we're a big organisation. We're driven by data. So people can turn around to me and say, my market's, very quiet. That won't work in my market. This isn't going to work over here. No, take a step back, please. They might be able to tell me that. But, in the back of my mind, and maybe this is where my business experience might have helped, I'm well used to people saying, oh, that's not going to work, and this market is dead and there's no point in doing that. We have data to back it up. So I would always say to people, okay, you're telling me that, but the reality is you haven't spoken to that group of people. You haven't done this. You haven't met those candidates. You haven't sent those CVs out, whatever it might be. It's very simple, I suppose, to get under the bonnet of our business and to see what happens and correlate it to, if you do X, Y, Z, this leads to success. It's a relatively simple formula in the world of recruitment, and there are certain things in every market that you need to do. Like, you need to interview candidates, you need to generate new candidates, you need to be getting these candidates out to your clients and representing them in the market. Now, if you're not doing enough of meeting your candidates or enough of talking to your clients, there is definitely going to be problems within your business, and sometimes that can just be fixed by doing more of the right things.
Yeah, I think that's pretty much every single sales funnel, right? And recruitment is no different. You need so many people at the top of the funnel to ensure by the bottom of the funnel you're getting the results you need. Yeah.
That's it. And in a market like this at the moment, because the economy is precarious in some areas, it's being able to look at that data and being agile. And that's, I think, a big function of what L&D are doing at the moment. It's looking at how we can really, really partner with the business and go, okay, the market has slowed down. There's a lack of confidence, particularly amongst maybe the candidate population. Now, when there's a lack of confidence there, people don't move jobs as frequent. So there's less candidates coming in through the door. We need to business develop more to get out there and to find new opportunities for our candidates. So L&D's role in this is, rather than kind of sitting back and shaking our hands and saying, well, we've done our bit, we've trained our people in, it's really being agile and going, what's the market doing now? And how can we kind of future-proof people's careers by giving them the skills now for a market that's in a downturn? And in 6 months' time, if we're seeing things are picking up, giving them the skills that they need in order to be able to flourish in that market too.
Yeah, I mean, it's a great description you've given there of kind of really partnering with the business and understanding. There's always this kind of lovely image I like to show people of these 4 people in this rowboat, and 2 people are sitting at the front of it, like scooping out water like there's no tomorrow because there's a big leak in the boat, and the other 2 are sitting at the back of the boat going, well, I'm glad I'm not on their side. We see that play out so brilliantly in kind of organizations, where these kind of pockets or silos of functions are sitting and thinking, well, we've done our part brilliantly, the rest of the place is a dumpster fire, but we're okay because we've done what we need to do.
Exactly.
And I just want to go back a bit, because one of the questions, and maybe this is taking us back a little bit, that something you said earlier is kind of intriguing me, is obviously, you know, your organization has got to a point where it's understood that this kind of almost decentralized learning and development that was happening kind of very organically in offices around the world needed to be centralized. What was some of the kind of the key reasons or catalysts for the CEO and the Chief People Officer deciding now is the time?
I think probably a number of reasons, in the sense that when I took on the role, I initially was looking after Europe, Middle East, Africa, and that region. And I think that we saw quite quickly the power of having one message to all of these people and being able to deliver a kind of a top-down message saying this is what good looks like. We also then saw how open people were to join training sessions from all across the world, and what a great opportunity we had to get our managing director in Paris on a webinar who could talk to people across Europe, you know, and we would all log on. Whereas I think in the past we kept our training regionally, and what, you know, they learnt in Paris really stayed in Paris. And we realised that as a global company there's this huge opportunity, and you know, what a great opportunity to be able to say we've got the head of our Bangkok office who is going to give a presentation on how, you know, they leverage their candidate community, and people in Dublin can log on and listen to this. And we realised really that the message across the globe was going to be the same. So even though we had these kind of pockets and decentralised areas of people doing L&D really, really well, we could continue on like that, but the opportunity was still there to go, hey, if we join forces as a global business and we can really share our knowledge, because that I think is a big part of what our L&D aspirations is. It's to share best practice across the globe. You know, we're a business, we're a well-established one. We're doing some brilliant things across the globe, and what a shame if somebody doesn't know about it. Let's really just kind of blast those doors open and make sure that everybody who can join in and listen to what's going on and learn from each other. I always call it, and it might sound a bit cheesy, but it's like a bit of a pay it forward culture. I think there's a real obligation for staff within Robert Walters, like for people like myself who have all of this experience, you know, because recruitment, again, you know, you have peaks, you have troughs. It's really helpful to talk to people who've been through it before, because they know what to do. There are certain things that you go, okay, in a downturn, you know, you batten down the hatches and this is what you need to do to be successful. And to have that level of experience and senior management around the globe, it would just be such a waste not to maximise that potential.
Right, so taking a slight left turn at Albuquerque here, there's something else I think that's really I'm really kind of curious to get your insights on is a lot of people in the learning and development industry start in the learning and development industry, and that's not necessarily a good or a bad thing. It generally is. But I'm curious, because you've come from, you know, a position where you're taking responsibility for the entire operational performance and success of an office, a kind of a segment of the business, and you've now stepped into this head of learning and development role. How much of your kind of experience, your kind of credibility that came from that managing director role is assisting in this kind of journey of being this learning and development person? And maybe to kind of reframe it slightly, is if they had brought someone in from the outside who had just come as a learning and development person into this role, how do you think that it might have been different?
It's a really interesting question, Jason. I think for me it was really beneficial and advantageous for me to be able to step into this role, because my stakeholders predominantly were my colleagues. So, I knew that in order for this role to become successful, I needed to put my arms around the managing directors of the Robert Walters Group across the world. And, for me, the success of L&D rests hugely on how credible people in the business think it is. And I knew that people, being in the business 20 years, hopefully have done a few good things along the way and proved myself. And I knew that the MDs would have a level of comfort going, well, we know that the content of what they're going to produce is great. We know that Louise understands our business. So there was a huge advantage, and I won't lie, I felt really kind of as if it was a job that was almost tailor-made for me, because all of my skills and everything that I knew I could take into this role. Now, saying that, I had a huge amount to learn. So it wasn't easy street for me to walk into an L&D role, because I really then, I suppose, went from being in the front office of a business, and you've got front office salespeople very used to that environment, to working with the group functions of the business. Now, I've always thought group functions are extraordinarily important within any business, and very much held my legal, marketing, HR and finance counsel close to my chest and had a great working relationship with them. But I realised that when you are out of the front office, business works quite differently within an organisation as well. And I had a huge amount to learn in terms of the frustrations that I had about the time that things took to get done. Recruitment is a very quick, fast, paced business where you act and then you think. Sometimes it was very natural to me, whereas moving into an L&D role took a lot of thought and preparation and listening to people and partnering with people and getting feedback and all of these things that I found fascinating, but it really slowed me down in my tracks and made me go, I can't be slapdash about this, and I can't just kind of act on a gut feeling like I had done in my previous role. I really need to have a strategy and a plan. And yes, the credibility that I bring to this role is going to help me, but there's a huge area for me to develop in now, and I need to get this right, because otherwise it's going to fall apart. So I hope that answers. It was beneficial, but at the same time, I probably naively thought at the beginning it was going to be a bit easier than it was. And I realised that I've a whole newfound respect for group functions who work as a business partnering with multiple stakeholders internally within a business.
Well, I guess it's just a managing director role in another kind of guise or form, because you've got all of the functions of a business. You've got to market yourself, you've got to sell yourself into the business, you've got to operate efficiently, you've got to kind of justify your existence, right?
And that's how I see it, and I think that it's probably a good way to see it, because I'm constantly, as you just said there, looking at how we justify ourselves. I'm very aware of the fact that learning and development, it's a cost. We want to make sure that we are proving our worth at all times, and it's really important to me that the business sees us as a function that is very, very aligned, knows exactly what they're doing, and is able to work in sympathy with the business wherever the region is and whatever the economic climate is.
Do you, you've kind of talked about, I think the big dilemma for most central services functions is that they see themselves as a cost center to the organization, which often ends up being synonymous with a phrase which I don't like, called the grudge purchase. It's like, oh good Lord, we have to use them again. But do you often, specifically, do you see an opportunity or a scenario where you could become a profit center to the business, where you could like almost reframe what you're doing from being cost inducing to kind of profit generating by, for instance, as an example, saying, since this process has been put into the business, we've seen the time it takes for a new recruiter to become profitable, going from say 3 or 4 months down to 1 or 2 months, and therefore the revenue that generates for the business is X, and therefore we can show that as a revenue tag.
Absolutely, Jason, and I'm all about that, because I think that within the world of recruitment, my stakeholders, that's what they love to hear. They want me to be able to say to them, a new starter typically took 4 months before they made their first placement, but you run them through our induction and our academy, and they're coming out the other end, and we've reduced the ramp up to profitability by 2, 3, 4 weeks. As a result of us and our wonderful management program, the retention of management and the management population has increased within the organization. We have just purchased an LMS, a learning management system. So our data at the moment, I have been collating it and hounding people for it in as much as possible. We're, as I said, a relatively new function. That is something that we're looking at in the future, because I always think in any function you want to be able to prove the value of it, and to be able to say to people, the metrics that we're putting in place. And I think you have to be really careful with metrics, but the metrics that we're putting in place are looking at the return on investment. I would love to also think, and we only spoke about this within our L&D team yesterday, that at some stage in the future, down the line, that the Robert Walters L&D team could potentially work with our clients. We've just brought in a really great onboarding experience for our new starters. Potentially there's an opportunity for us down the line to turn around to our clients and say, we've done it with it here, do you need help doing it somewhere else? So who knows? I think the future for learning and development is really exciting. I think the more commercial that we are, and look, maybe that's my business hat on me, and I might be told, absolutely not, do not do that. L&D stays internally within the business. But I think a function like L&D should always look at things like that.
I couldn't agree more, and it might be a completely different business model, but I love that you're kind of thinking that way. About. And again, I'm asking that because I think more people should think that way. I think the biggest challenge is that we often kind of get complacent in the things that we're doing and don't challenge the status quo enough. And learning and development, and the reason that we're doing this podcast in the first place is that I think that learning and development is becoming almost that kind of key function in the business that does need to be reframed, and the historical status quo does need to be challenged quite a bit. Yeah, I agree. Saying that, there's still deep insecurities inside of me when I go, oh my God, when I speak to a learning and development professional who's been in the industry a long time, and I sit there and I'm like, we sometimes I feel as if we speak different languages, and it's a learning curve that I'm still on, and I keep there's always going to be that little moment of panic where I go, oh no, I'm a fraud. So I'm bringing a business background, but definitely on my list is to continue gaining more experience and knowledge and insight into more of a traditional L&D background. Brilliant. And I wish you all the best, because I think it sounds like you're on a good trajectory there. Thank you. Final kind of in-depth question before we go to our two closing questions I always like to ask is, almost coming back full circle, and you talked about communication skills and problem solving skills, and kind of these future kind of soft skills that are going to be required for organizations to be successful and relevant as this kind of industry all our industries start to change with technology and then the fast pace of the way things are changing. You also talked about your onboarding process and some kind of successes there. Have you got examples of how you've kind of brought the kind of learning and development of these types of skills into your organization?
Interesting question. I think that we have certainly broadened out kind of within our onboarding. We have brought in, number one, a corporate welcome, which has become a global one, which is used all over the world now. One of the many things we talk about in that is the expected behaviours and leadership behaviours that we expect within our business. And again, this is something that 5-10 years ago, it's not something we touched on, and we certainly didn't speak to new starters about, but we speak about our leaders and the expectation that we have of them to be able to lead with authenticity, so that even as a new starter, you'll come into the business, you should, be able to see our values living and breathing from day one when you come in here. We want our leaders to be authentic. We want them to then lead with care, which is, we've got authenticity, we've got care. And when I talk about care, it's people who have a genuine, interest in people's well-being, whether that be their education and their support, or just their journey throughout their time with us. And then the last one is to lead with an entrepreneurial mindset. So when we talk about that, it's to have those business practices and really best practice from across the globe that we are aligning and bringing together. So this is something that we have brought into our induction. So this is week 1. It's something that we've brought into our recruitment skills program, which is a 3-week program which all new starters go through. And this is proving to be, I think, something that people are very interested in. It's not just technical skills, but again, it's these new behaviours and new ways of communicating with people that we are setting out our stall from the beginning to say, this is the culture here. This is how we expect people to behave. And I think when you start like that and you mean to continue, it may be a year, it may be 2 years, but cultural change will come as a result.
Brilliant. I think, that sounds exciting. So the final 2 questions I always like to ask our guests on the show is, first one is in the kind of context of giving, imparting wisdom, this journey of continuous learning. And I'm especially kind of excited because you've come from quite a different background, from kind of being a managing director coming into this learning and development space. If you were sitting across from someone who was new to the space, kind of coming into this learning and development, looking at the kind of context of the world today, your experience, what's the one piece of advice or nugget of wisdom that you would give them?
If they were coming into the learning and development space? I think the most important thing in my role is to really, really listen to your business and to listen to the feedback, because you can have the best corporate induction in the world, you can have the most beautiful programs that are laid out. If people are not engaging with them, they have failed and you have failed. And again, probably even across my short 2-year journey within L&D, I've made some dreadful mistakes where I've gone, this is a wonderful training program. I invited 50 people, maybe only 8 showed up. It wasn't a success. So therefore, it's really listening to your stakeholders and going, am I doing everything that I can to make sure that people are engaging with this? Because if they're not engaging, it's worth nothing.
Well, therein lies one of those soft skills, active listening.
Very true.
Definitely great advice. Second question is, we always like someone to share something that's like, a book or a podcast or something that you've seen, watched, heard recently that's had some kind of a profound effect or like reframed your thinking with the audience.
There's a podcast actually that a friend of mine spoke to me about 4 years ago, and he said to me, you know what, I think you'd really like this podcast. And I've been listening to it almost every day since. I'm sure you know it. It's called The Moth. Mm-hmm. You know The Moth?
I know The Moth, yeah. Okay,
basically, so you get everyday average people coming on and telling an everyday story. It could be about anything. I absolutely love it. I'm addicted to it. And I think it's because I'm really interested in A, human behaviour, but B, I love the art of storytelling. I find it absolutely fascinating how somebody can make a 10 or a 15-minute story out of something that is really banal. It could take one person 30 seconds to say this, and somebody else can bring out this rich and beautiful story and make it last for 10 minutes and make you laugh and cry at the same time. It's one of those things, if I get 10 or 15 minutes a day, I will sit down, listen to a story, smile. I wouldn't say it's the most educational thing in the world, but it always teaches me the importance of being able to tell a good story, to craft a good story, because again, this is so much part of L&D, but I think it's part of life as well. It's just something I really, really enjoy.
Yeah, and I mean, we've actually talked about storytelling with a few guests on the show. It is for me something that just elevates and makes a huge difference. Any type of interaction or engagement. Yeah. All right, thank you, Louise. That was really, really insightful. Loved the conversation. Loved your kind of the unique insight that you brought into this conversation, coming from a managing director into L&D, because often we talk about it from the opposite way, is where more L&D people need to start behaving like mini CEOs or managing directors, and understanding that their environment is more than just a cost center or a silo in the organization, but needs to be run with many of the same functions as a normal business. It needs marketing, it needs sales, it needs its own L&D. So absolutely. It's been great to see, kind of you having come from that side, going into L&D, being able to kind of almost reflect a lot of those same kind of patterns and thoughts.
Yeah. Well, I've really enjoyed speaking to you, and I'm certainly learning every day, making lots of mistakes along the way, but enjoying it.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Jason.
Hey, thanks so much for joining us for this episode of Impact Learning Visionaries. If you found it interesting or helpful, please subscribe by clicking on the button down below so you don't miss our next one. Also, be sure to check out our Reality Bites blog for more information on how technology is aiding in learning development. Links are all in the description below. Go check it out. Thanks a lot. Bye.